When you look at life from the vantage point of my 67 years, the past seems both infinitely distant and surprisingly close at the same time. I remember our first home, a tiny apartment on the outskirts of Edgewood, where we began our journey. It seemed like an eternity to us then. Hugh was not like other men I'd met. Not handsome, but he had an inner strength and confidence. When he talked about his plans, his eyes lit up with a special fire, and I believed every word he said. We met at an industrial equipment exhibition. I was a coordinator there, and he was one of the young engineers presenting his design. Hugh came up to me during a break, and instead of complimenting me, he started talking passionately about his invention, an improved valve for pumping equipment. I remember thinking at the time, what a strange way to get to know a girl. But his enthusiasm was so genuine that I couldn't help but smile. 6 months later, we were married, and a year later, Hugh quit his job to start his own company. Many people thought his decision was crazy, including my parents. Eleanor, you realize you're going to be living on the dole, don't you? My mom wailed. But I believed in Hugh and supported him as best I could. The first years were hard. Hugh worked 16 hours a day, and I combined being office manager for his tiny company with part-time jobs to make ends meet. We saved money on everything except materials for his inventions. Our dining room table became a drafting board and our living room a parts warehouse. But we were young and hopeful. The breakthrough came in the 5th year when Hugh patented his industrial filter cleaning system. It turned out to be 30% more efficient than existing analogs and cheaper to produce. Orders poured in one after another. We moved to a bigger office, hired employees, and soon we could afford a new house, the same one I still live in. Ashton was born when Hugh's business was already going strong. We waited a long time for a child, almost 10 years. The doctors said the chances were slim, and we were almost resigned, but a miracle happened. Hugh cried when he held his son in his arms for the first time. Now I have someone to pass on my life's work to, he said, and there was such pride in his voice that my heart squeezed. Ashton had been a carbon copy of his father since he was a boy. The same dark hair, the same stubborn chin, the same crease between his eyebrows when he focused on something. Hugh loved the boy and spoiled him immensely. I tried to object, but my husband only said, Ellie, I want to give my son everything I've been deprived of. And Hugh was deprived of many things. He grew up in a plumber's family, where every dollar counted, and higher education could only dream of. Hugh earned his engineering degree by working as a security guard at night and taking classes during the day. He wanted Ashton to have a different life, carefree and full of opportunities. I noticed signs of spoiling when Ashton turned 7. For his birthday, he received a bicycle from us, not the most expensive, but a nice one. Instead of joy, my son pouted, "Why not a mountain bike like Pierce Woodworth's?" Hugh went to the store the very next day and bought that very mountain bike. I tried to explain to my husband that indulging every whim would not be good for the child, but Hugh only smiled. "You're too hard on the boy, Ellie. Let him enjoy life." As the years passed, this pattern only grew stronger. Expensive toys were replaced by expensive gadgets, then expensive clothes, and finally expensive cars. For his 16th birthday, Ashton got a sporty Mustang, though I begged Hugh to start with something more modest and safe. 3 months later, my son wrecked the car, luckily with only scratches. Hugh bought him a new, even more expensive one. But it would be unfair to say that Ashton grew up exclusively spoiled egoist. There were other traits inherited from his father: a sharp mind, the ability to quickly grasp new things, an entrepreneurial spirit. At school, he effortlessly received high marks if the subject interested him. Hugh was proud when his son won scientific competitions or offered unexpected solutions to technical problems. After school, Ashton entered a prestigious university at the Faculty of Engineering, followed in his father's footsteps. Hugh was happy. He saw his son as a successor to his business and gradually began to introduce him to the business. Ashton spent his summer vacations at the production site, getting acquainted with different aspects of the company's work. After graduating from university, the son immediately took a managerial position in his father's firm. Some employees whispered behind his back about the undeserved promotion, but Hugh was adamant. This is a family business, and who but my son will lead it in the future? By the age of 30, Ashton already controlled a significant part of the company's operations, although Hugh still made the key decisions. They had their disagreements. Ashton wanted a more aggressive development strategy, seeking rapid expansion and increased profits, while Hugh took a more conservative approach, valuing reputation and quality. Dad thinks in old categories, Ashton once told me during a family dinner. The world has changed. We need to be more flexible, more risk-taking. His son's personal life was not as successful as his career. He has been married twice, and both marriages ended in divorce. His first wife, his college sweetheart Beatrice, left after 3 years together, unable to stand his workaholism and self-centeredness. He lives in his own world where there is room for only himself. She told me before she left. I couldn't argue with her. His second wife, Pearl, lasted 5 years and even bore him a daughter, my granddaughter Darcy. After the divorce, Ashton paid child support faithfully, but he rarely saw his daughter, always citing busyness. It hurt me to see this. I loved Darcy with all my heart and tried to spend as much time with her as possible to compensate for her father's absence. Hugh never criticized his son for failures in his personal life, but I could see a shadow of disappointment in his eyes. He dreamed of a big family, grandchildren running around the house. Instead, he got a workaholic who rarely showed up even at family gatherings. And then came that unfortunate trip. Hugh returned from a business trip to Germany with a bad cough. Just a cold, he brushed it off, but within a week it got worse. I insisted on seeing a doctor, and our world came crashing down. Lung cancer, stage 4. 6 months, a year tops, the oncologist said, avoiding looking us in the eye. Hugh took the news with surprising calm. Well, that means we should have time to finalize things, he said as we drove home from the doctor's office. I sobbed and he comforted me. Ashton reacted differently. At first, he didn't believe me, demanded repeated examinations, consultations with the best specialists. Then he was angry at the doctors, at fate, at his father for running the disease. Finally, he fell into a sort of business-like torpor, immersed in work even more than before. He rarely visited his father, always referring to the urgent business of the company. The last months of Hugh's life were filled with pain and medication, but he tried to hold on. We talked a lot about the past, about the future we would no longer have, about our son. Hugh was more worried about Ashton than himself. He's talented, Ellie, very talented, but he lacks humanity, my husband said one evening when the pain had receded a little after the morphine injection. I spoiled him too much, you were right. Now I'm afraid he might do something stupid without me. A month before he died, Hugh called his lawyer and had a long talk with him alone. When I asked the reason for the visit, my husband was evasive. Getting things in order, dear. I don't want to leave you and Ashton in any trouble. Hugh left quietly, in his sleep, holding my hand, as if he'd just exhaled and not inhaled again. 42 years of marriage ended in an instant, and I was left alone in a huge house full of memories. The funeral was crowded. Hugh was respected in business circles. Ashton was stoic, accepting condolences, thanking me for my father's kind words. I felt lost, as if a part of me had died with my husband. After the funeral, My son stayed at my parents' house for a while. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, silent. Then Ashton started talking about the company, current contracts, expansion plans, new product lines. Not a word about his father, not a word about the loss. It was as if he was in a hurry to turn the page and move on. Ashton, I interrupted him, your father just died. Maybe this isn't the time to discuss business. He looked at me in surprise, as if he didn't know what I meant. Life goes on, Mom. Father would have wanted the company to thrive. At that moment, I still put his callousness down to shock, to the peculiarities of men's perception of grief. But the next few days showed that something had changed in the way my son and I communicated. Ashton used to call me at least once a week, but now his calls were rare and short. He stopped stopping by for Sunday lunches, always making excuses. When I called him, he answered irritably, as if I was distracting him from something important. 2 weeks after the funeral, I discovered that my credit card linked to Hugh's account had been blocked. When I called the bank, I was told that the blocking order had come from the account's new owner, Ashton Brooks. I dialed my son's number, but he didn't pick up. Instead, he texted me, busy in a meeting, what's up? My card has been blocked. Don't know why? I texted back. Oh, that. Yeah, I've temporarily suspended your access to the account. Need to sort out my inheritance and finances. I'll stop by this weekend and we'll talk it over. But Ashton didn't show up this weekend. Instead, he sent his assistant with an envelope containing $5,000 in cash and a short note. This is for operating expenses. It'll be sorted out soon. I looked at the money and couldn't believe that my own son was giving me an allowance, as if I were some distant relative instead of the woman who had given birth to him, raised him, and supported him all these years. For the first time in a long time, I felt not only grief at the loss of my husband, but also anger. Anger at my son, who seemed to have decided that he could now dispose of my life as he saw fit. My intuition told me that this was just the beginning of trouble. This year's winter had been particularly hard. Not so much because of the weather, though, there was more snow than usual, but because of the crushing loneliness that seemed to fill every corner of Hugh and me. 3 months without him. 3 months of waking up to an empty bed and machine cooking breakfast for two before realizing my mistake. The house needed maintenance. The old gutter was clogged. There was a leak in the basement. One of the floorboards on the porch was rotten and creaking dangerously. Hugh used to take care of all this, and if something was too much for him to do, he called in the workmen. Now it was all on my shoulders, and I felt helpless. I called Ashton, hoping for help. After a long ringtone, he finally answered, but his voice sounded impatient. Mom, I'm in an important meeting. What's wrong? I'm sorry, darling, but I'm having trouble with the house. The gutter's clogged, there's water in the basement, and, Mom, he interrupted, call customer service. They'll take care of it. But Ashton, I don't know who to call. Your father's always. Google it, Mom. It's all over the internet now. Look, I really have to go. I'll call you later. He disconnected, and I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling old and useless. Sure, I could have found a service, but that wasn't the point. I wanted my son's support, his presence, the feeling that I wasn't alone in the world. Ashton didn't call back that day or the next. I found a plumber and a carpenter on my own, paid from the money he left me. The amount was dwindling and there was no new money coming in. Hugh's lawyer said the probate proceedings would take time, and in the meantime, I should live on what I had. On the weekend, as the sun came out and the snow began to melt, there was a knock on the door. I opened it, expecting to see my neighbor Ruby, the only person who had visited me regularly since Hugh's death. But there was Ashton, impeccable in his expensive coat and his leather briefcase. Hi, Mom, he said, walking uninvited into the house. I thought I'd stop by and check on you. I was glad to see him, despite his cold tone. I quickly made tea and took out the cookies I'd baked yesterday. Ashton was sitting in the living room, looking at something on his phone, and only looked up when I put the tray on the table. "How's work going?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "Tense," he replied. "I'm cleaning up some of my father's mess. You know, his management methods were 10 years out of date. The company was losing money through inefficiency. I was hurt by the way he talked about my father, as if he were an incompetent manager, not a man who had built a business from scratch and run it successfully for 4 decades. Your father built this company." "Yes, yes, from scratch, I know," Ashton interrupted. "But times change, Mom. What worked in the '80s doesn't work now. I've had to cut a quarter of my staff, streamline processes, renegotiate contracts with suppliers. You fired people? I couldn't believe my ears. But a lot of people have worked with your father for decades. Business is not a charity," he said. "If a company is unprofitable, it dies. I'm not going to let that happen." I was silent, realizing there was no point in arguing. Ashton finished his tea and finally looked at me. "Mom, I came to talk to you about your financial situation." "My financial situation?" I questioned him. "Yes. You see, the inheritance process is dragging on. There are some, nuances in my father's will that my lawyers are working out. Until that's resolved, we have to be frugal." "Frugal?" My voice shook. "Ashton, I can barely make ends meet with the money you left me. The house needs repairs, the heating bill's gone up. That's what I wanted to talk to you about." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder of papers. "This house is too big and too expensive for one person to maintain. You need something smaller, simpler." I stared at him, not believing my ears. "You're suggesting I sell the house? The house your father and I lived in for 40 years? The house where you grew up?" "It's a practical solution, Mom." He spoke to me like a child. "With the proceeds, you could buy a cozy apartment in the city and still have enough to live on." "I'm not moving anywhere," I said firmly. "This house is part of me, part of my life with Hugh." Ashton sighed with obvious irritation. "Mom, be reasonable. Keeping this house is a waste of money. Besides, it's worth more now than ever. The realtors say the neighborhood is booming." "Have you consulted with realtors yet?" I could feel the resentment building inside me. "Without me knowing?" "I'm just exploring my options." He shrugged. "As trustee of an estate, it's my responsibility to consider all possibilities." "Trustee?" That was the first time I'd ever heard of it. "Since when?" "Since my father's will was opened." Ashton started gathering the documents back into his briefcase. "But we'll discuss the details later, when the paperwork's ready. In the meantime, I'll leave you some more money for current expenses." He placed an envelope on the table. "But please save up. Times are tough right now." He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I walked him to the door, feeling devastated and cheated. "Son," I said when he was already on the doorstep, "your father would want you to take care of me." Something flashed in his eyes, either irritation or guilt, but it quickly disappeared. "I do, Mom, in my own way." After he left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking out at the snow-covered garden. Hugh had loved those trees so much, planted each one himself, tended them, trimmed the branches. How can I sell all this? How can I betray the memory of our lives? The envelope contained $3,000, less than last time. It would barely cover a month's worth of expenses for the house. In the evening, my friend Ruby called, inviting me over for a cup of tea. She lived 3 houses down from us and was one of the few people who had visited me regularly since Hugh's death. I agreed, realizing I needed to talk. Ruby greeted me with fresh pastries and a sympathetic look. She had known our family for many years. Our children had grown up together, and we had shared our joys and sorrows. Now, when I told her about Ashton's visit, she shook her head. Ellie, you should consult an independent lawyer. The way Ashton is behaving seems suspicious to me. Do you think he's hiding something? I asked, feeling my anxiety growing inside me. I don't know, Ruby said honestly. But in such matters, it is better to be on the safe side. Hugh was a smart man. He couldn't leave you destitute. The next day, I called Milo Hammond, Hugh's old friend and the owner of the law firm. Although he was no longer practicing himself, he could recommend a good specialist. Eleanor, it's good to hear from you. His voice was warm and concerned. How are you doing? Not so good, Milo, I admitted. There are some problems with Hugh's inheritance. I need to consult a good lawyer. Sure, he said immediately. Come to the office tomorrow. I'll ask Philippa Crane to meet you. She specializes in inheritance matters. The next morning, I went to Milo's office. Philippa Crane was a petite woman with a shrewd eye and determined manners. After hearing my story, she frowned. Mrs. Brooks, this is all very strange. Normally, a widow is entitled to at least a portion of her husband's estate, regardless of the contents of the will. Have you seen the will? No, I shook my head. Ashton said his lawyers were still working on some details. That's even more suspicious. Philippa tapped her pen on the table. The will should be opened and read shortly after the death. It's already been 3 months. Do you know who your husband's attorney was? Julian Pierce, I answered. He worked with Hugh for many years. I'll get in touch with him. Philippa nodded. In the meantime, don't sign any documents your son might offer you. None at all. I returned home feeling that I had made the right move. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was not alone in my struggle. A week later, Philippa called me. Mrs. Brooks, I have some interesting news. I spoke to Julian Pierce. He said that your husband's will does contain some unusual terms, but refused to go into details over the phone. However, he was very surprised to learn that you had been kept in the dark. According to him, the formal reading of the will is scheduled for the 15th of next month, 3 weeks from now. You should have received a notice. I didn't receive anything, I replied, confused. Julian claims to have sent notices to both you and your son 2 weeks ago. Philippa sounded suspicious. Mrs. Brooks, are you sure your son isn't intercepting your mail? That question made me think. Indeed, lately I had been receiving less correspondence than usual. The mailbox was often empty, even when bills or magazines to which I subscribed were due. Yeah, I don't know, I answered honestly. But from now on, I'll check the mail myself, every day. Good, Philippa said. I told Julian that I would represent you at the reading of the will. He promised to send a new notice by registered letter with return receipt. The letter arrived 2 days later. I personally signed for it and opened the envelope with trepidation. Inside was a formal invitation to the reading of Hugh Brooks's will, scheduled for March 15th at Julian Pierce's office. I didn't call Ashton, deciding to see if he would let me know about the upcoming event himself. Days passed, and there was no call or message from my son. I began to suspect that he was really hiding something from me. 10 days before the date set for the reading of the will, there was another knock at the door. This time it was a middle-aged woman in a business suit. Mrs. Brooks? She asked. My name is Deborah Keating, and I'm from Prime Estate. Your son made an appointment for me to appraise the house. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. My son made an appointment with you? To appraise my house? Yes, ma'am. The woman looked a little embarrassed. Mr. Brooks said you were planning to sell and asked for a preliminary appraisal to determine the market value. Come in, I said, barely containing my anger. I think we need to clear something up. Deborah went into the living room, pulled out a clipboard, and started looking through her notes. "Here," she said, showing me the screen. "A request from Ashton Brooks for an appraisal of the property at this address." He indicated that he was the trustee of the property and was planning a sale in the coming months. On the screen was indeed a letter from Ashton, not only asking for an appraisal of the house, but also stating the anticipated date of the listing for sale, the 1st of April, just 2 weeks after the reading of the will. "Ms. Keating," I said, trying to speak calmly, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I have no plans to sell this house. Moreover, it belongs to me, not my son." "But Mr. Brooks said," she began. "My son has no right to own this house," I interrupted firmly. "And he won't have that right. I'm asking you to cancel the appraisal application." Deborah looked confused. "Yeah, I understand. I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Brooks. I'll let the office know there's been a mistake." After she left, I called Philippa immediately and told her what had happened. "This is out of line," she said indignantly. "Your son is acting as if he has already inherited the property and has full control over it. But until the will is officially read and executed, he has no such rights. I will contact his attorney and make it clear that any action to dispose of the property prior to the court's decision will be considered illegal." I thanked Philippa, and after finishing the conversation, I sat in Hugh's chair for a long time, trying to understand what was happening to my son. How could he have changed so much? Or maybe he had always been like this, and I just didn't want to see it. That evening, the phone rang. Ashton. He sounded annoyed. "Mom, what's the big deal? Why did you refuse to appraise the house?" "Because I'm not going to sell it," I replied. "And I'm wondering why you thought you could dispose of my house without my knowledge?" "Technically, it's not your house," he said coldly. "It was my father's, and now it's part of the inheritance I'm managing. You don't control anything until the reading of the will, Ashton." I tried to keep my voice calm, even though I was seething inside. "By the way, why didn't you tell me about the reading?" There was a pause in the phone. "So you know," he said finally. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you tried to keep it from me." "Why, Ashton? What's in your father's will that I shouldn't know?" "Don't be dramatic, Mother." His tone became condescending. "I just wanted to get the formalities out of the way without getting emotional. You're in a vulnerable state right now, and you don't need any more stress." "Thank you for your concern." I didn't hide the irony. "But I'm perfectly capable of handling my emotions. And I'll be attending the reading of the will with my lawyer starting March 15th. "Lawyer?" There was surprise in his voice. "Why do you need a lawyer?" "To protect my interests, Ashton. Obviously, you have your own." "That's nonsense," he cut him off. "I'm acting in the best interest of my family, and if you hire a lawyer, it's only going to make things more complicated and expensive." "Nevertheless, that's what I'm going to do," I said firmly. "And Ashton, don't you dare do anything more with this house. It's not for sale." "We'll come back to this conversation," he said, his voice steely, "after the reading of the will." He disconnected, and I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. Whatever my son was up to, I wasn't going to let him control my life and the memory of Hugh. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight. March 15th was surprisingly sunny and warm, as if nature had decided to give me a little respite from the long winter. I woke up early, before dawn, and lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Today was going to decide my fate, at least the financial part of it. Philippa Crane had offered to pick me up, and I gratefully accepted. I didn't want to take public transportation or call a cab. It was going to be a nerve-wracking day, and I didn't need the hassle. At breakfast, I couldn't swallow much of anything. I couldn't get a bite down my throat. I had only had a cup of tea and half a piece of toast when the doorbell rang. Philippa was as punctual as ever. Ready, Mrs. Brooks? She asked, giving me a professional look. I nodded, though ready was the last word I could use to describe my condition. We got into her black sedan and hit the road. Don't worry so much, Philippa said, giving me a quick glance. Whatever happens today, we'll get through it. The law is on your side. It's not just the law, I sighed. My son, I don't understand what happened to him. How could he have changed so much? Money often changes people, Philippa answered simply. Or rather, it reveals their true nature. We drove through downtown Edgewood, past familiar streets and buildings. I'd lived here all my life, and I remembered how the city had grown and changed. Here was the new mall, built on the site of the old movie theater where Hugh and I had watched movies in the early years of our marriage. Here's the bank building where we took out our first business loan. Every corner held memories. Julian Pierce's office was in an old brick building in the business part of town. When we parked, I noticed Ashton's sports car nearby. It looked like he had arrived before us. Julian's secretary, a young woman with a polite smile, met us in the reception area. Mr. Pierce is expecting you, Mrs. Brooks, she said. The others had already gathered. I looked questioningly at Philippa. The others? Who else is attending the reading? My lawyer asked businesslike. Mr. Ashton Brooks and his lawyer, and Mr. Noel Templeton, replied the secretary. Noel Templeton. I hadn't heard that name in years. He was Hugh's old partner. They started the business together. But after a disagreement over the company's development strategy, Noel sold his share to Hugh and started his own firm. They remained on friendly terms, though they rarely saw each other. What's he doing here? The secretary led us into a spacious conference room. At a long table sat three men: Julian Pierce, a gray-haired lawyer with a shrewd eye; Ashton, impeccable in his expensive suit; and next to him, a young man with cold eyes, apparently his lawyer. At the window stood Noel Templeton, a stocky man with a tanned face and kind eyes. Time had hardly changed him. Ashton barely glanced at me when we entered, but Noel immediately rose and came over, smiling warmly. Ellie, darling, he hugged me. It's been so long since we've seen each other. It's a shame to have to meet under these circumstances. Hugh was a wonderful man. Thank you, Noel. I was touched by his words. It's good to see you too, even though it's under sad circumstances. Philippa and I took seats opposite Ashton and his lawyer. Julian Pierce coughed, calling attention to himself. Thank you all for your punctuality. We are gathered today for the formal reading of Hugh Brooks's last will and testament. I should note that this is not an ordinary will, so I ask everyone to listen carefully to its contents before asking questions or expressing objections. Ashton tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. His lawyer whispered something to him, and he nodded, not hiding a smug smile. Before we begin, Ashton said suddenly, I'd like to clear the air for everyone here. As the only son and heir, I have already effectively taken over the management of my father's company and assets. This is a formality we have to go through, but I want everyone to understand that Brooks Industrial is now under my control, and I have a clear vision for its future. Julian Pierce raised his hand, stopping him. Mr. Brooks, you're getting ahead of yourself. The will has not yet been announced, and no one, including you, has stepped forward to inherit. It's a legal technicality, Ashton replied dismissively. My father always prepared me to inherit the business. All 40 million of the company's assets and personal fortune are mine by right, and I'm not going to let anyone. He glanced in my direction, and for a moment something like regret flashed in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Mr. Brooks, Julian's voice became sterner. Please refrain from making any statements until the will is read. It's not just a formality, believe me. He opened the leather folder in front of him and pulled out several sheets of paper. The Last Will and Testament of Hugh James Brooks. Julian began to read. I, Hugh James Brooks, being of sound mind and sound judgment, hereby express my last will and testament as to the disposition of my estate after my death. Ashton leaned back in his chair, clearly losing interest in the formal part. His lawyer was writing something down in a notebook, glancing at Philippa from time to time. First, Julian continued, I want all my debts and funeral expenses paid out of my estate as a matter of priority. That has already been done, Ashton interrupted. Julian threw him a disapproving glance and continued. Second, all of my assets, both movable and immovable, including but not limited to my interest in Brooks Industrial, all bank accounts, investments, securities, real estate, and personal effects, I transfer to my only son, Ashton Hugh Brooks. Ashton allowed himself a smug smile and nodded to his lawyer as if to say, I told you so. On the following condition. Julian paused and looked directly at Ashton. His son's smile slowly disappeared from his face. Conditions? He interjected. What condition? Let me continue, Mr. Brooks, Julian said calmly and went back to reading. This inheritance goes to my son on the condition that he will care for my beloved wife, Eleanor Brooks, providing her with a comfortable life at a level no less than that to which she was accustomed during my lifetime. This includes, but is not limited to, maintaining her right to reside in our family home at 22 Cliff Street, Edgewood, for the remainder of her life, providing monthly maintenance of at least $15,000, paying all medical expenses, and providing any necessary assistance and support. I listened with bated breath. Hugh had taken care of me as promised. But why was Ashton keeping these terms from me? Julian turned the page and continued. If my son violates this condition, disrespects or neglects my wife, attempts to restrict her rights or degrade her living conditions, my entire inheritance shall be divided as follows. 50% of all assets shall go to my wife, Eleanor Brooks, at her complete disposal. The controlling interest in Brooks Industrial, 60%, shall go to my longtime friend and partner, Noel Templeton, on the condition that all employees who have been with the company for more than 5 years retain their jobs. The remaining assets are to be divided between my son, Ashton Brooks, 30%, and the Young Engineers Charitable Foundation, 10%. There was silence in the conference room. I shifted my gaze from Julian to Ashton, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My son sat motionless, his face pale. It's ridiculous, he finally said. Dad couldn't have written that. It's a forgery. I assure you, Mr. Brooks, the will is genuine, Julian replied calmly. It was made and signed by your father in my presence, and in the presence of 2 witnesses a month before his death. Your father was fully conscious and of sound mind, as evidenced by Dr. Webster's report, which is also attached to the will. But this is absurd. Ashton slammed his fist on the table. How can one determine whether or not I'm being disrespectful? It's subjective. It can't be a legal basis for disinheritance. The will provides for that point as well. Julian turned back to the document. To quote, the decision to violate the terms of the will shall be made by a trustee appointed by me. I appoint Julian Pierce, my trusted lawyer and friend, as such trustee. It is his duty to assess the situation objectively based on facts and evidence. Ashton looked at Julian with a mixture of shock and fury in his eyes. And you've already made your decision? Without hearing me out? Without giving me a chance to explain myself? I've been following the events of the last few months, Mr. Brooks, Julian replied. I have documented evidence that you have blocked your mother's access to bank accounts, severely restricted her financial support, failed to help with home repairs, and moreover, taken steps to sell the family home without her consent. In addition, you have deliberately withheld information from her about the reading of the will. All of this is in direct contravention of your father's will. These are temporary measures, Ashton exclaimed. I was just trying to sort out the finances before making any long-term decisions. Blocking your mother's accounts and trying to sell the house above her head can hardly be called temporary measures, Julian objected. In any case, my mind is made up. The terms of the will have been violated, so the alternative distribution of the inheritance comes into effect. Ashton jumped up from his seat. I'm not gonna let it go. I will challenge the will in court. Dad was out of his mind when he signed it, or he was misled. He threw an angry glance at me. It was you, wasn't it? You manipulated him when he was weak and sick. You knew about those conditions and provoked me on purpose. I was shocked by his accusations. Ashton, I knew nothing about the contents of the will. I only found out about it now, with you. Lies, he shouted. It was all planned. You and that old schemer. He nodded toward Noel. You conspired to take the company from me. Noel, who had been silently watching, replied calmly. I hadn't seen Hugh for the last 2 years before I learned of his illness, and I haven't spoken to Ellie until today. I don't know what's going on between you two, but it seems Hugh saw this situation coming and took action. It's a conspiracy. Ashton shifted his gaze to his lawyer. Do something about it. Is this legal? The young lawyer looked confused. Mr. Brooks, on a preliminary assessment, the will is correctly drafted. We can try to contest it on the grounds of the testator's incapacity, but that would require substantial evidence. Find it, Ashton interrupted. Dig deeper. Dad was sick, on heavy medication. He couldn't think straight. He turned to Julian. And you overstepped your authority. As an objective trustee, you should have talked to me first. Listened to my side. I've tried to contact you twice in the last month, Mr. Brooks, Julian replied. You have not answered my calls or my letters. Besides, the facts speak for themselves. Your actions towards your mother are documented. Ashton blushed with rage. It's not fair. I've worked for the company for years. I know it like the back of my hand. And now some old man who has had nothing to do with the business for the last 10 years gets control? That's absurd. I'm not going to run the company personally, Noel said calmly. I will appoint a board of directors made up of experienced employees. But I will ensure that Hugh's legacy is preserved and his employees are protected. Ashton looked at me, his eyes narrowing. And you, Mother? Are you happy? Did you get what you wanted? Half of your father's fortune without any effort on your part? I was deeply hurt by his words. Ashton, I never wanted it to turn out this way. I only wanted respect and care from my own son. If you had just treated me like a human being, the whole inheritance would have been yours. Don't lecture me, he snapped at me. You were always on your father's side, always supporting him, even when he was wrong. And now, because of the coffin, he continues to control my life. Philippa put her hand on my shoulder in a show of support. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Your father loved you, Ashton. He just wanted you to grow up to be a decent man. Decent in his mind, shouted the son. Always by his rules, even his inheritance, with conditions and reservations. Well, it's not over yet. I will fight. I'll prove that this will is invalid. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something in his ear, but Ashton waved him away. No, I will not rest. This is a conspiracy. They're all conspiring against me. He pointed his finger at Julian. You will regret this decision. I will sue not only for contesting the will, but also you personally for abuse of power and bias. Then he looked at Noel. And you won't even make it to the company's doorstep. My lawyers will get a restraining order against any changes in management until the court decides. Finally, he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not a son, but a stranger, an angry man. And I'm not done with you, Mom. You betrayed me. You could have stopped it all, but you chose money. Now don't expect anything from me. No help, no support, not even basic respect. You don't exist to me anymore. With those words, he stormed out of the conference room, slamming the door so hard that the glass shook. His lawyer, apologizing, hurried after him. A heavy silence hung in the room. I sat there, stunned by what had happened, unable to believe that my own son had just disowned me. "I'm sorry for what happened, Eleanor," Julian said quietly. Hugh had hoped that it wouldn't happen, that the terms of the will would make Ashton think and change his behavior. "He left us no choice," Noel added, walking over to me. "But don't worry, we can handle his threats. I'll take care of the company, as Hugh promised." Philippa squeezed my hand. "Mrs. Brooks, Ashton is furious now and is saying things he may regret later. Give him time to cool down. In the meantime, we must prepare for a possible trial. Although I have to say, his chances of contesting the will are minimal." I nodded, unable to utter a word. My heart was breaking with pain and disappointment. I had gained financial security, but lost my son. Was it worth it? Julian gathered the documents and handed Noel and I each a copy of the will. "In the next few days, we'll draw up the necessary paperwork to transfer the assets. In the meantime, Eleanor, I will immediately restore your access to your bank accounts and make sure that your allowance is paid as directed in the will." "Thank you," I replied quietly, accepting the papers. We walked out of the building on a sunny spring day. Ashton's car was no longer in the parking lot. I stared at the empty lot and felt an emptiness growing in my soul. I still had the money and the house, but I seemed to have lost my family forever. The week after the reading of the will passed in a strange daze. I wandered around the empty house, mechanically carrying out everyday tasks, but my thoughts kept returning to that terrible day and Ashton's last words. "You no longer exist for me." How could my son, whom I had carried under my heart, raised, loved unconditionally, utter such words? Julian kept his promise. The day after the reading of the will, I received a call from the bank informing me that my access to my accounts had been restored. A new account had been opened in my name, and an impressive sum had been deposited, the first installment of my inheritance. I looked at the numbers on the bank statement and couldn't believe that it was now my money. In 40 years of marriage, I'd never handled that kind of money on my own. I hadn't heard from Ashton. I tried calling him several times, but he didn't answer. I even drove to his house, a luxurious mansion in the upscale Edgewood neighborhood, but the concierge told me that Mr. Brooks had instructed him not to let me in. On the 10th day after the reading of the will, I received a call from Philippa Crane. "Mrs. Brooks, we need to meet. Your son has filed a lawsuit to contest the will." I'd expected that, but I felt my heart ache anyway. "On what grounds?" I asked. "He claims that your husband was incapacitated at the time he made the will due to illness and powerful drugs. There are also hints in the suit that the deceased was under pressure. He implicitly blames you and Noel Templeton." "That's not true," I exclaimed. "Hugh had been of sound mind until his last days, and I didn't even know the contents of the will." "I believe you, Mrs. Brooks," Philippa reassured me, "and the court will probably believe you, too. We have a medical report to prove that your husband was legally competent at the time he made the will, but we need to prepare for a long legal fight." At the store the next day, I was accosted by Mona Peterson, wife of one of Hugh's oldest employees. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you." She put her arm around me. "How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm trying, Mona." I smiled weakly. "How's Warren? How are things at the firm? Mona's face darkened. Not easy, Ellie. Your son, he's making a lot of changes. He's cut nearly a third of the staff, including those who've been with Hugh since the beginning. Warren's hanging in there, but rumor has it that the next wave of layoffs is just around the corner. But shouldn't Noel Templeton be in control of the company now? Ashton has filed a temporary restraining order against any changes in management until his lawsuit is resolved, Mona explained. So for now, he stays in charge. And Ellie, she lowered her voice, he says terrible things about you. He says that you manipulated Hugh to get money, that you never cared about the company, and now you want to destroy it. That's not true, Mona. I didn't even know the contents of the will until the official reading. I believe you, honey. Mona squeezed my hand. Warren and I have known you for 30 years, but others, some of the new staff might believe you. I returned home in a depressed mood. All appetite was gone, and I just sat in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window. Was the whole town going to be judging me now? Believing Ashton's malicious accusations? Philippa met me in her office with her usual business-like demeanor, but I could see the worry in her eyes. What's wrong? I asked. Any news? Yes, and it's not good news. Ashton hired one of the most aggressive law firms in the state, Barkley, Howard and Associates. They're known for their tactic of not so much winning cases in court as wearing down their opponents to the point where they agree to unfavorable settlements. What does that mean for us? It means we're in for a long and dirty fight. Philippa sighed. They will use any method, from delaying the process to trying to smear your reputation. They've already started, I hear. I nodded, remembering my conversation with Mona. But we have an advantage, Philippa continued. The will is impeccable. There's a medical report on your husband's capacity, and there's clear evidence that Ashton violated the terms of the will. We just need to stand up to the pressure and not waver. I'm ready to fight, I said firmly. This isn't about money, Philippa. It's about justice and the memory of Hugh. He wanted his legacy preserved, not sold off piecemeal for a quick profit. The next few days became a whirlwind of legal advice, documents, and depositions. Philippa was right. Ashton's lawyers used every loophole to delay the process. They demanded more and more documents, challenged every statement we made, filed motions one after another. But the hardest part was not the legal battles, but the emotional oppression, the rumors Ashton was spreading around town. On several occasions, as I left the house, I caught stares from my neighbors. Once at the supermarket, the cashier, always friendly, barely said hello to me. And when I went to my favorite cafe, where Hugh and I often had breakfast on weekends, the owner ostentatiously sat me at a table in the far corner, even though the place was almost empty. One such day, on my way home from a meeting with Philippa, I noticed a familiar car in front of my house. Noel Templeton was waiting for me, sitting on the veranda steps. Hi, Ellie. He rose when he saw me. I hope you don't mind my unannounced visit. Of course not. I was glad to see a friendly face. Come in. I was just about to make some tea. We settled in the kitchen, the coziest place in the house, in Hugh's opinion. Noel looked worried. How are you holding up? He asked, taking a cup of tea. I've been better, I answered honestly. Ashton, he does everything he can to smear me, and a lot of people seem to believe him. People love gossip, Noel sighed, but those who really know you would never believe such nonsense. And how are things with the company? I heard Ashton got temporary control. Yeah, and he's using it to the fullest. Noel frowned. Mass layoffs, renegotiating contracts in favor of dubious partners, selling off some assets. It's like he wants to squeeze everything out of the company while he's still in control. But why? This is his inheritance, his future. Why destroy what his father built? I think he's preparing for the worst, Noel said thoughtfully. If he loses the trial, he wants to maximize his profits. And if he wins, he can always blame the unwise decisions of the previous management for the company's problems. That's terrible. I shook my head. Hugh wouldn't stand for it. That's why I'm here, Ellie. Noel straightened. I can't just sit back and watch Hugh's life's work be ruined. My lawyers are working on getting the temporary injunction lifted, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, I'm gathering information about Ashton's actions documentary evidence that he's intentionally harming the company. And how can I help? I need witnesses, Noel answered. People who can confirm that Hugh was in his right mind when he made the will, and that you didn't pressure him. And also people who can tell me about Ashton's behavior after his father's death. I wondered. Indeed, many of Hugh's old friends had called me with condolences after his death. Some had even stopped by. They could attest that Hugh had kept a clear mind until his last days. I'll talk to them, I nodded. And another thing, I have tapes of conversations with Ashton. After he blocked my cards, I started recording our phone conversations just in case. There's his admissions that he's temporarily restricted my access to money and is going to optimize my housekeeping expenses. Noel's eyes lit up. That's very valuable, Ellie. It's direct proof that he violated the terms of the will. We talked for another hour, compiling a list of potential witnesses and discussing strategy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. The next day, I started calling old friends and acquaintances. Many expressed support and willingness to help, although some avoided a direct answer for fear of interfering in a family conflict. But even a few witnesses were enough to confirm Hugh was in his right mind and no one put pressure on him. However, not a week later, as strange calls began. First, Ruby reported that a young man who introduced himself as Ashton's assistant had come to see her. He hinted that if she gave the right testimony, she could expect a generous reward. Ruby refused and immediately called me. Then Carson Webb, the recently retired former CFO of Hugh's company, called. He said that Ashton's people had visited him too, but with a different offer. If he supported Hugh's theory of incapacity, he would be guaranteed a consulting position with a very attractive salary. I sent them to hell, Ellie, Carson said. Hugh wasn't just my boss, he was my friend. I'm not going to sully his memory for money. I gave this information to Philippa, and she was outraged. This is witness tampering. We can file a complaint in court. Do we have proof? Unfortunately, only the words of your friends. Philippa sighed. Ashton's men are smart enough to leave no trace. That same day, Noel called me with the news. Ellie, we found something interesting. It turns out Ashton is negotiating the sale of the company's major assets to a conglomerate called Global Industries. He's planning to get rid of the whole company. But why? I was shocked. He always said the company was his future, his legacy. Apparently, after Hugh died, his priorities changed. Noel replied grimly. Global is offering a very attractive price, but they have a reputation for raiding companies, buying them, selling them off piecemeal, and laying off staff. If this deal goes through, there will be nothing left of Hugh's life's work. That evening, I heard a knock on the door. On the doorstep stood Ashton, for the first time in a month since the reading of the will. He looked tired and shabby, despite his impeccable suit. May I come in? He asked without greeting. I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We walked into the living room and sat in the chairs opposite each other, like strangers. Why did you come in, Ashton? I asked when the silence became unbearable. To propose a settlement. He looked away from me, not at me. It doesn't make sense, spending money on lawyers, ruining the family's reputation. What's your offer? You give up your claim to the company and half of the inheritance, and in return, You get this house as full property and a monthly allowance of $8,000, more than enough for a comfortable life. I looked at my son carefully, trying to figure out what was behind it. And what about the company? Are you going to sell it to global industries? His eyes widened in surprise for a moment. My plans for the company don't concern you. Yes, they are, Ashton. It's your father's life's work. He didn't build this company so you could sell it for a quick buck. You don't get to judge business decisions. He was getting annoyed. You've been a housewife all your life. What do you know about modern business? Enough to see when someone is acting out of greed rather than common sense. I remained calm. The answer is no. I will not accept your offer. Your father's will must be carried out the way he wanted. Ashton stood up abruptly. Then blame yourself. Do you think you have a chance of winning in court? I will destroy you. You'll be left with no money, no reputation, no friends. I'll take care of it. Are you threatening me, Ashton? I stood up too, looking him straight in the eye. To your own mother? I'm protecting what is rightfully mine, he shouted. Father earned this money to give it to me, his son and heir, and you and that old schemer Templeton want to take it all away. No one is taking anything away, I objected. You lost everything when you thought you could treat me like a burden. Dad was out of his mind. Ashton pounded his fist on the table. He was weak and susceptible to influence, and you took advantage of that. You know that's not true. I shook my head, and the court will know it. We have witnesses, medical reports, tapes of conversations. We have proof that you're planning to sell the company against your father's wishes. Ashton's face contorted with anger. Templeton? That damned old man? He's spying on me. He took a step toward me. Listen to me carefully. This is my last attempt to settle this amicably. If you don't accept the offer by the end of the week, the consequences will be unpleasant. Are you threatening me? I haven't taken a step back. What are you going to do, Ashton? He looked at me with a coldness I barely recognized as my son. I'll find a way, he said quietly. Believe me, I'll find a way to make you regret your decision. With those words, he headed for the exit. He stopped at the door and added without turning around, 3 days, Mom. You have 3 days to come to your senses. The morning of the trial was overcast. Low clouds hung over Edgewood, promising rain, and the wind blew fallen leaves through the streets. I stood at my bedroom window, watching nature reflect my inner state, a mixture of anxiety, fatigue, and a strange determination. 3 months of legal battles had exhausted me to the breaking point. Endless meetings, witness testimony, mountains of documents, experts, counter-experts. Sometimes it felt like there was no end to it. Ashton and his lawyers used every legal trick in the book to drag out the process, to wear me down, to make me give up. But I held on, thanks in large part to the support of Philippa and Noel. The hardest trial was the days when I testified, sitting in front of the judge and jury, feeling the cold, hostile stare of my son, answering provocative questions from his lawyers, trying to portray me as a calculating manipulator who used my husband's illness to enrich herself. It was excruciating, but the truth was stronger. Medical reports confirmed that Hugh remained lucid until his final days. Witnesses, doctors, nurses, friends told me how lucid he remained despite his illness, and tapes of my conversations with Ashton and testimony from company officials proved that he had indeed violated the terms of the will by trying to deprive me of my livelihood and sell my father's business. Now, 3 exhausting months later, there was to be a final hearing at which the judge would announce his decision. Philippa picked me up at 9 o'clock. She was unusually quiet on the way to court. Are you all right? I asked, noticing her fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. Yeah, I'm just, worried. she admitted with a slight smile. But you shouldn't be. We've done everything we can, and I'm confident in our position. But I've never had a case in my practice that meant so much to me. I am touched by her words. Thank you, Philippa. Whatever happens today, I am grateful for your support. Noel met us outside the courthouse. He looked tense but determined. Are you ready? He asked, offering me his hand. As ready as I can be, I replied, accepting his support. We entered the courtroom, which was already packed with reporters from the local papers, curious townspeople, and, of course, Ashton and his lawyers. My son sat upright, stone-faced and ostentatiously confident, but I noticed him fidgeting nervously with his cufflinks, a childhood habit that manifested itself in moments of excitement. When Judge Harding entered the room, everyone stood up. This elderly man with the shrewd eyes and calm voice inspired respect. Throughout the trial, I had become convinced of his impartiality and attention to detail. Please be seated, he said as he took his seat. Today I will be announcing the judgment in the will of Hugh James Brooks. I must say that this has been a difficult case, involving both legal and deeply personal issues. I have carefully considered all of the evidence presented, the testimony of witnesses and expert testimony. He paused as if gathering his thoughts and continued. The first question that needed to be considered was Hugh Brooks of sound mind when he made the will? On the basis of medical reports and the testimony of witnesses, the court found that, despite his serious illness, Mr. Brooks was lucid and fully aware of the significance of his actions when he made the will. There was no evidence that he was pressured or misled. I felt the tension release a little. The first and most important point was in our favor. The second point was, had the terms of the will been violated by the heir, Ashton Brooks? According to the will, Ashton Brooks was to care for his mother, Eleanor Brooks, providing her with a comfortable life at a level not less than that to which she is accustomed. The court found that after Hugh Brooks died, his son took the following actions: blocking Mrs. Brooks' access to bank accounts, significantly restricting her financial maintenance, attempting to sell the family home without her consent, and spreading defamatory information about her reputation. The judge turned the page and continued. All of these actions are in direct contravention of the late Hugh Brooks' will as expressed in his will. Moreover, the court found that Ashton Brooks intentionally withheld information from his mother about the contents of the will and the date of its formal disclosure, which also shows bad faith. I cast a glance at Ashton. He was still, but his face was pale, and his fingers were gripping the armrests of his chair. In view of the foregoing, the judge's voice became even more formal. The court finds that the will of Hugh James Brooks is valid in all respects. The terms of the will are hereby declared to have been violated by Ashton Brooks. As a consequence, an alternative distribution of inheritance comes into effect. 50% of all assets goes to Eleanor Brooks. The controlling interest in Brooks Industrial goes to Noel Templeton. 30% of the remaining assets remain with Ashton Brooks. 10% goes to a charitable foundation for the support of young engineers. The hall murmured. Philippa squeezed my hand, and Noel exhaled quietly in relief. We had won. Justice had been served. In addition, the judge continued, overlapping the murmur of voices, the court orders Ashton Brooks to pay the plaintiff's legal fees. The court also dismisses Ashton Brooks' counterclaim for invalidation of his father's will as unfounded. The judgment is effective immediately. He struck the gavel, and the hall filled with voices again. Journalists rushed to the exit to relay the news to the newsrooms. Noel and Philippa congratulated me, but I looked at my son. Ashton sat motionless, as if stunned, while his lawyers fervently explained something to him. Then he stood up abruptly and headed for the exit without looking in my direction. We walked out of the courthouse into the drizzling rain. A few reporters surrounded us, demanding comment, but Philippa skillfully steered them away, giving Noel and me a chance to get into the car. We won, Ellie. Noel squeezed my hand. Hugh would be proud of you. Yes, I answered quietly. But at what cost? I lost my son. You didn't lose him today, Noel said softly. You lost him when he decided that money was more important than family. That's his choice, not yours. That evening, Philippa called with the news that the temporary ban on management changes had been lifted, and Noel could officially take over as controlling shareholder. She also informed me that my bank accounts had been fully unlocked, and I now had access to all the assets due to me under the will. You're a very wealthy woman now, Mrs. Brooks, Philippa said. $20 million is a serious sum. I can recommend a good financial advisor to help you manage those funds. I thanked her and promised to think about it. After hanging up, I sat in Hugh's chair for a long time, trying to comprehend what had happened. $20 million, a sum that seemed unreal, money that gave me a freedom and independence I'd never dreamed of. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Noel was completely immersed in the company's affairs, trying to undo the damage Ashton had done. Fortunately, the deal with Global Industries hadn't been finalized yet, and it had been stopped. Some of the fired employees had been brought back, but not all of them. Many had already found new jobs or left town. I hadn't heard from Ashton in almost 2 weeks. I tried to call him several times, but his phone was disconnected. According to Ruby, he left town right after the trial without telling anyone where he was going. And then, one rainy evening, he showed up on my doorstep. No warning, no call. Just stood there in the rain, drenched and lost. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. He walked into the living room, leaving wet footprints on the parquet, and stopped by the fireplace, holding his hands out to the fire. You're soaked, I said, pulling Hugh's old sweater out of the closet. Change your clothes, you'll catch cold. Ashton took the sweater, but he didn't change, just held it in his hands, staring at the fire. I've lost, he said at last. Lost everything. My company, my money, my reputation. You still have 30% of your inheritance, I reminded him. That's a lot of money, Ashton. You could start something new. It's not about the money, he shook his head. It's about me letting my father down. He wanted me to carry on his business, and I ruined it. There was such genuine remorse in his voice that for a moment I believed in his change of heart. My heart trembled. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe this situation had made him reevaluate his values. Ashton, I stepped closer. We all make mistakes. It's important to recognize them and correct them. Yes, Mom. He looked up at me, tears glistening in his eyes. I want to make things right. I've been a terrible son. I've caused you so much pain. Please forgive me. He knelt down, wrapping his arms around me. Such a gesture, such a show of remorse. And yet something inside of me was wary. Was it too theatrical, too insincere? Stand up, Ashton, I said. Let's talk like adults. He stood up, wiping his eyes, and sat down in the chair. I sat across from him, watching him carefully. I've been thinking a lot these days, he began, about what I've done, about the way I've behaved with you since my father died. It's unforgivable, I know, but I want to try to make it right. How? I asked him bluntly. Yeah, I think we could start over. He made a vague gesture with his hand. Forget the past. Try to rebuild our relationship. Maybe even, work together? Work together? I asked, not understanding. Yes, he had that familiar glint in his eyes. You see, I still have a stake in the company, though not a controlling one, and you've got a lot of money. Together, we could, buy out Templeton's share of the company. bring the company back into the family like my father wanted. And that's when I realized it. It wasn't remorse or reconciliation. It was another attempt at manipulation, another plan to regain control of the money and the company. Ashton, I said slowly, do you really expect me to believe in your sudden rebirth after everything you've done? Mom, I sincerely, no. I raised my hand, stopping him. Don't. I can see you're not here to make peace, but to come up with another plan. You haven't changed, Ashton. You still see me as nothing more than a means to an end. His face changed, the mask of remorse falling away, giving way to the usual cold calculation. You've always been too perceptive, he said, leaning back in his chair. But think about it. Isn't this a win-win proposition? You get some control of the company, I get my leadership role back. Templeton retires with good money, everybody's happy. Except for the employees you'll start laying off again, I pointed out. Except for the partners whose contracts you'll tear up. Except for the company's reputation, which you're willing to sacrifice for a quick profit. It's business, Mom, he shrugged. It's nothing personal. It was always personal to your father, I countered. The company wasn't just a source of income, it was his life's work, his legacy. He didn't build it for you to destroy it for greed. Ashton stood up abruptly. So, you're backing out? Yes, Ashton, I refuse, I said firmly. And I think you'd better go. You'll regret it. His voice turned cold. You could have gotten your son back, but you chose money. Who's calculating and greedy now? I'm not choosing between my son and money, I said calmly. I choose between truth and lies, between honesty and manipulation. And I won't let you manipulate me anymore, Ashton. He looked at me with undisguised anger. Fine. Enjoy your wealth and your solitude, Mom. You'll never see me again. With those words, he threw Hugh's sweater on the couch and walked out, slamming the door so hard that the glass shook. I stayed sitting in the living room, staring at the fire in the fireplace. Strangely, I felt no pain or disappointment, only relief and freedom. It was as if the heavy chains that had bound me for years had finally fallen. I woke up the next morning with an unusual sense of lightness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the trial, or Ashton, or the money. I just enjoyed the quiet of the house, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the sunlight streaming through the windows. After breakfast, I called Noel and told him about Ashton's visit. He never gives up, Noel sighed. But don't worry, Ellie. I won't sell him my share for any money. The company is in good hands. I know, I smiled. And I trust you, Noel. Hugh was right to choose you. After the conversation, I sat in Hugh's office for a long time, going through old photographs and letters. So many memories, so many years spent together. I had always lived for others, first for my husband, then for my son. I always adjusted, yielded, put their interests above my own. And now, at the age of 67, for the first time, I was truly free. Free to make my own decisions, free to follow my own path, free to live for myself. It was frightening and exciting at the same time. In the evening, I pulled out an old box stored in the attic, my dreams, as I called them. There I put magazine clippings, brochures, notes about places I wanted to visit, things I wanted to do. Hugh always thought these wishes were bliss, a waste of money and time. Why do you want Venice or Paris? He used to say. What haven't you seen there? When I finish an important contract, we'll go to Miami. It's beautiful there, too. We never went to Europe. There were always more important things to do, more urgent contracts, more practical ways to spend the money. I spread out old clippings on the table, Venice canals, the Eiffel Tower, Greek islands, Japanese gardens. So many places I dreamed of seeing, So many experiences I deprived myself of. Time to fix this, I thought, pulling out a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "My plan for my new life." The first item was a trip to Italy. I had always dreamed of seeing Venice, walking the narrow streets of Florence, visiting the museums of Rome. The second was a photography course. I have always loved photography, but never developed this hobby seriously. The third was improving the garden behind the house. Fourth was volunteering at the local library, and so on. Point by point, the picture of a new life, my life, was taking shape. The next day, I called a travel agency and booked a tour of Italy starting in a month. Then I signed up for a photography course, which was starting the following week. And in the evening, I met up with Ruby and told her about my plans. "I'm so happy for you, Ellie," she said sincerely. "You deserve this freedom, this happiness." "You know," I said thoughtfully, "it took me 67 years to realize a simple truth. Life is given to us once, and it belongs only to us. Not to our husbands, not to our children, not to society, but to ourselves. And we have the right to live it as we see fit." "Better late than never," Ruby smiled, raising her wine glass. "To your new life, Ellie." "To your new life," I echoed, feeling the warmth of confidence and anticipation inside me. I hadn't forgiven Ashton, and I probably never would. The wound caused by his betrayal was too deep to ever fully heal. But I let go of the anger and resentment, let go of the past. I looked only forward to a future that, for the first time in years, belonged to me alone.